Hello, USC fans. Connor Morrissette and Chris Trevino. It's time for Instant Analysis. We're, of course, with USCFootball.com. We just watched the media viewing period of USC's 15th practice of fall camp so far. So, Chris, let's start with this. We saw some special teams work today, and when we walked into the media viewing portion, some of the big guys were fielding some punts, some kickoffs. We saw Jude Wolfe, Lake McCree, even Jamil Muhammad catch some punts and some kicks. Why did they do that today? Explain that to the viewers.
Yeah, I would say they aren't the biggest guys. Those would be the offensive linemen. These are kind of the medium big guys. But yeah, the tight ends, some of those weird defenders that were randomly in there. My assessment is that those are guys that are going to be your first line of protection for those returners, and they just want to get them some reps of catching the ball in case, there is a short kickoff or a squib kick that comes out there. Don't try to catch them up by surprise because, one bad fumble or catch attempt could ruin the team's momentum. So you just want to get those guys a little bit of reps, get those guys some used to some catching some sky high kickoffs.
We can report that none of those guys dropped a punt or a kick, so that was good to see. And Anthony Lucas was working in that group. He even had a catch that I thought looked pretty good, looked pretty natural for a bigger guy. Impressions on Anthony Lucas potentially playing some special teams. I wasn't really sure if he would get in on the special teams unit this year, but it looks like he might.
Yeah, Anthony Lucas, 6'6", 250, 60, 70, 290 pounds, whatever you subscribe to being his weight. He's an athletic dude, and he's a freak athlete, and you would want to put him maybe on the kickoff or punt return or punt block unit, with those long arms. And he was just a busy guy today. He was moving around, moved back to the defensive end spot today, worked with the defensive lineman after he's been working with the rush ends for most of fall camp, so that's been interesting. But just to see him out there with the special teams unit, it gives you a sense of how they view him, want to get him some reps wherever that may be. If it's on defense or special teams where, a player can grow into their own, just getting used to the game and getting some live action out there.
And I keep saying kicks or punts. With these bigger guys, it was kicks because they're not going to be fielding punts. The people who are fielding punts, though, Raleigh Brown and Zach Branch, we've seen a lot of players filter into that position during warm-ups, but when USC got into the specific punting drill today, those were the two guys back there. I think that's interesting. Some younger players who they expect to play a big role in special teams.
Yeah, those are kind of your two most dynamic guys from a punt return unit, and obviously your smallest guys are Raleigh Brown and Zach Branch. Good luck catching those guys when they get the crease. But yeah, it was nice to see them get a little bit of action. For the most part, they weren't kind of fielding it with a lot of intensity. They were just kind of just catch the ball, let it go. But there were a couple of reps where they would, catch it and try to make some moves. Zach Branch was trying to get away from some people at one point. But yeah, for the most part, it was interesting to kind of see those two be the first two out and the only two out for the punt return. And we've talked about how we think that Zach Branch is going to be a huge playmaker and difference maker on special teams. That was, kind of lacking last season. So he could be the shot in the arm that this unit needs.
We've seen Mekhi Lemon during warm-ups, field punts, Taj Washington, Dorian Singer. It looks like, based on today, something that USC fans can take away. It's either going to be Zach Branch or Raleigh Brown back there for punt. So I think that's certainly significant. Moving to some other areas of practice, Chris, the offensive line, once again, working really hard. We saw Emmanuel Pregnon have to repeat a couple of reps in a drill where the ball would be snapped and then the lineman would run out and try to block an oncoming linebacker, get to the second level, and Coach Henson a couple times didn't like the reps from Emmanuel Pregnon, but we can report that he's still with the first team group. And another interesting thing, Mason Murphy, he's not quite with that first team group at right tackle, but he's really pushing Michael Tarquin. He is right on his heels, and that's a position battle that continues to really intrigue me.
Yeah, Mason Murphy, the kind of old guy, got some starts last year at right tackle and left tackle. You could tell how much they liked him from last season, just him leapfrogging Cortland Ford, who ended up going to the transfer portal after spring camp. But you could tell how much they liked him because they wanted to get him reps. They wanted to get him experience. 6'5", 310-pound guy. They don't make him like that on California. And he was the number 1 rated offensive lineman on the West Coast in California when USC signed him. Just a 3-star, but hey, you develop those guys, and that's what they want to do, get him developed. And yeah, we know they like him. He had some ups and downs, especially at the end of the season. Kind of his consistency kind of dropped off, but he was a first-year player, first time getting significant snaps. So you hope that you're going to see some massive offseason growth from him. And I think we're going to see a lot of him, especially on the second unit. He could be the guy who could be your swing tackle. If they need that 6th man off the bench, he is first in line to do that just because of experience. But yeah, it seems like he's really pushing for that right tackle spot over the Florida transfer Tarquin.
Last thing that we've seen, we've had a lot of examples of guys playing rush end and defensive line, moving all around today. Anthony Lucas, who had been with the Russians for a long time, he was with the defensive linemen. We saw Sam Green with the defensive linemen. I think that just speaks to the versatility of this group and how if someone's listed as a defensive lineman or a rush end on the roster, they may end up playing multiple spots.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of cross-training over the last couple weeks here, and that rush end room, at one point it was so deep with like close to 6 guys in there. Now it's really tightened up, at least for the last couple practices with Jamil Muhammad, Braylon Shelby, and then Romello Height, who's back from being nicked up earlier in camp. So it was kind of those 3 as the scholarship guys. But yeah, they're showing their versatility with Sam Green kind of moving down. Remember, Sam Green was recruited to play defensive line, and they thought, hey, I think his body fits the rush end position more, so that's why they threw him in the spring, and he excelled very much. And then, Anthony Lucas, we've known, can go back and forth, and he did so in the spring. So just see him get a little more work in mock game week for the defensive end spot. Who knows where he's going to line up the first game week. I expect he'll be a rush end, defensive end. He's a chess piece you could move around a lot on this board, so I'm excited to see what they end up doing with him. 6'6", 250, 60, 70, 90 pound, 300 pound, whatever you want to call him. But yeah, exciting to see what Anthony Lucas is going to do in his first true season as a contributor.
Yeah, and Sam Green, he was also playing with that special teams unit early on in practice. So he's a guy who they just want to get on the field, it looks like, because he's really made an impression. So he's someone that USC fans should certainly know about as well. Chris, let's get into now what we heard after practice. Lincoln Riley spoke, Alex Grinch spoke, some players on the defensive side of the ball spoke. What was your biggest takeaway from what Lincoln Riley had to say today?
I think him talking about the linebackers, because the linebackers have been banged up for the most part. Eric Gentry's been banged up a little bit. Shane Lee has been out for multiple practices. Rayshawn Davis obviously has that cast on his hand for a little bit of a broken bone. So, that depth is really taking a hit, but they are still able to get quality practice reps because they have Tackett Curtis, they have Mason Cobb. But him just talking about, they hope they're going to get them all back healthy. For the most part, Alex Grinch says he feels like all those guys will be healthy come first week. So that's a good sign. Rayshawn Davis obviously is being a little bit limited with a broken bone, trying to get that fixed up. But, Eric Gentry is kind of the most important one. You pencil him in to be a starter. You want to get him to the first game healthy. He doesn't have to necessarily get a starter's amount of reps that first week. Ease him in. Opportunity for Tackett Curtis to get some reps. But just hearing him talk about the linebackers, and it's been a kind of concern seeing how much they've been banged up throughout fall camp. But, they're hoping that they're going to be ready for the first week.
Yeah, Riley also talked about Makai Lemon and how maybe outside of the building, some people think, okay, he's the 4th of those 4 freshman receivers because we don't hear his name as much. And Riley said that's absolutely not the case. He's been doing really well. So for the people concerned about Makai Lemon's development, Riley touched on that. You can watch the full Lincoln Riley interview on our YouTube page as well if you want to see everything that he had to say. He also said in the scrimmage he was impressed with Miller Moss and a few other guys, but he didn't really have that one breakout guy like he did the scrimmage before USC had when Zion Branch was that player. He did mention the offense looked better than they did in that first game, so the offense is coming along, and that's been a real key to this camp. One day the defense does well, the next day the offense does well. It's really consistent, and I think that's really important because Riley's had some teams, and he's admitted it, that one side of the ball has come out and dominated practice just about every day. The fact that those 2 units are so competitive, I think, speaks volumes about what we're going to see during the season.
Yeah, he mentioned that it kind of was a flip from the last scrimmage where this time the offense kind of came out hot and set the tone, and then the defense kind of closed things out, which was the opposite of what happened the previous scrimmage. So you're seeing a little more back and forth, but yeah, I think fans are just excited to actually, see an actual game. We're in the mock game week. They'll have one more scrimmage over the weekend, I'm assuming, and we're kind of in that weekly schedule that'll mimic for the season. So it's getting closer. We're almost there, Connor, for a game. We're almost there.
Yeah, I'm so ready because we've heard so much about how the defense is going to be so much better, the improvement, and I believe it, but I want to see it, of course, too. I think the defense will be better, but of course, how much better will determine the ceiling of this team. Alex Grinch talked about how today he thinks the fourth quarter, where they had some issues last year, especially at the end of the season, the defense wasn't as good. They're going to finish games strong because of the depth that they didn't have a year ago. He really hit on that today. What were your takeaways from Alex Grinch's conversation with the media? I thought that was the biggest one for me, just finishing strong.
Obviously, the biggest scrum of the day outside of Riley went to Alex Grinch, and obviously he's got a lot of questions to answer for this defense as they move into the season, and none of those questions will be answered until we actually play a game. Everything comes back to playing a game. But yeah, he talked about how he more or less said that he expects they're going to be a better fourth quarter defense, and that says a lot because, as we know, the defense faded a lot in the fourth quarter toward the end of the season. And he said a product of that, or why he thinks that, is because the depth is just showing up in practice. I mean, you could look at the defensive line room. There are so many bodies in there. We talked about the Russian room. There are so many bodies. Secondary, linebacker is the only room that's a little bit injured right now, as we mentioned. But yeah, just that having all the depth on the team is really going to keep them fresher for the fourth quarter, keep them ready to go in that fourth quarter. And he also talked about how this year he's really felt it's come down to 2 C's: consistency and coachability. He says this defense has been way more consistent over the course of this offseason and this fall camp, and they've been more coachable. They've been more open to taking coaching, and they've been able to work with them more. And he says the consistency is a product of just them being deeper and more talented than they were a year ago.
Last thing we heard from some players as well. Romello Height talked to you, Chris. Rush end, he's back fully healthy after dealing with a shoulder injury a year ago, a couple nicks in camp that had him out for a little bit, but he's back. What did you learn from him?
I just think, just listening to him talk, I think he's just really excited to play. More so than any USC fan, because he had the longest offseason of everyone, having that shoulder surgery, 2 games into the season and kind of having to wait through that. So I think he's really excited to get back on the field. But also, he said he doesn't care about who ends up with a starting job. He just wants all of his guys, speaking of the guys in the rush end room, Jamil Muhammad, Braylon Shelby, Sam Green, or Anthony Lucas, when they're in there, they just all want to go out and make plays. And he doesn't care who starts. It does not matter. They just want to go out and eat, make plays, and help this defense get sacks, tackles for loss, all those things. So, he's speaking like a veteran, even though he hasn't played that much in his career. He's still the older guy in that room along with Jamil, but a lot of guys are leaning on him. Braylon Shelby, he was like, yeah, Braylon is always in my ear. And he was like, that dude is a playmaker. That guy's a baller. And he's really excited for what Braylon Shelby is going to bring this season. He's obviously still young, still lots of room to grow, but, just seeing him play out on that practice field, he's very excited for the potential of him. And I think we'll see him at some point during the season, but yeah, overall, Romello Height just really excited to get back on the field after a very long offseason for him.
When we hear so much about the depth, I think the most important piece of the defensive depth is up front. I imagine they'll rotate some cornerbacks. I think the safeties, they'll try to use 2 as long as they can. Maybe the nickel will get rotated a little bit, but I imagine that defensive front, it's going to be like a revolving door. Guys are going to be coming, guys are going to be going. They just have a lot more depth than they did a year ago, so Coach Grinch talking about that, Romello Height talking about that, not caring if he starts. I think that's really important for this group because we are going to see a lot of guys. Solomon Byrd has consistently been shouted out by some of his teammates as another rush end who's really impressed. So the depth on the defensive front, I think, is going to be key.
Which will make for a stronger fourth quarter. It all goes back to the fourth quarter for this team and this defense. So, yeah, you get more bodies in there, save yourself. On the fourth quarter, you can make those plays that you need to close out a game.
He's Chris Trevino. I'm Connor Morrissette. This has been Instant Analysis. Chris, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.